Today we are going to look at Mr. Christmas Holiday Skaters. We will look at motor installation, gear installation, and lubrication. Looking at is the top of the Holiday Skaters. Now it comes in a couple of different versions. The skating top, where the skaters skate, is sometimes plastic and sometimes glass. The outer part is always plastic, but can come in different versions. The inner gear assembly is slightly different on some of them, but the principle is still the same. Motor, rotating gears, rotating magnets. Now, to start our installation of the new motor, you may want to tape the lamps. Now, when you turn the unit over, there will be quite a few screws to remove. Grab your Phillips head screwdriver and a thin one, not too thick because it will not fit through the holes. And you have quite a few screws, as you can see from the video. Once you have all the screws out, take a flathead screwdriver and pry the edge of the base to loosen it. Now the base, where the volume control is and the input for the voltage, you have to be careful when removing the cover to slide it out, because those seem to be caught in the end of the top cover. Now you can see this one with the glass plate. The glass plate is held on by approximately 6 screws. Now you'll want to take a Phillips screwdriver and remove all the screws from the plate. The plates have a little angle bracket that hold the glass on. Once you remove all the angle brackets, the plate will slide off. You can put that aside. This will be to mark the side of the plate where originally it had been positioned. Take a pencil, mark the top, and mark the bottom of the plate. This will tell you how the plate was positioned when we removed it from the base. You can put that piece aside for now. Now, as you can see, there's a motor assembly, 3 twirling gear assemblies, and 1 large gear. Very simple system. The power comes from the circuit board up to the motor. The motor turns the big wheel. The big wheel turns the smaller wheels and the magnets. Now, to remove the big wheel, unscrew with a Phillips screwdriver the main screw in the center. You will not need that right now, so put that aside. The second step is to pop up the magnet assembly. Now, as you can see, this is the gearbox assembly. You can always tell which wire is the positive and negative by looking at the circuit board. The wires coming from the circuit board will be color-coded, not always black and white. Sometimes they use different colors, but on the circuit board it'll say M minus M plus. The next step in our process is to remove the gearbox assembly from the base of the unit. You can use a small Phillips screwdriver. Now, some people just remove the top plate of the gearbox. I will remove the whole piece. This is for visual purposes. 4 screws for the top plate of the gearbox and 4 screws holding the gearbox onto the base. As you can see, the circuit board here, the M plus M minus will run over to the motor. Our motors from Happy Holidays Parts and Repair have a small dot on the motor which says plus. That will tell you where the plus of the motor is for the voltage. As you can see, I have removed the whole gearbox assembly from the plate. You don't have to do this, but I'm doing it so we can pull it off and you can really see for visual purposes. Now, to remove the motor, you will have to unscrew the plate from the top. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th gear is on the motor shaft. Now, with the kit you receive from us, there'll be extra wire, the motor, a tube of grease, and a new gear. If you want, you could use the old gear from the old motor. We supply a gear just in case the gear is stripped. Now, to remove the gear, take a flathead screwdriver and lightly pry it off. It won't be on there too hard. You can pull it off with your fingers and put it aside until we want to reinstall on the new motor. Now, to remove the motor from the plate, take a small Phillips screwdriver and remove the 2 screws. This will allow the motor to release from the gearbox plate. Once you have the motor out, put it aside and grab the new motor from the kit. The motor has 2 screw holes. Now, line the 2 screw holes up with the plate and reinstall the screws onto the motor using a Phillips screwdriver. Now that we have the motor attached to the plate, the most important part of the whole installation is putting the small gear back on the motor shaft. You can tap it lightly with a light hammer or anything you have that will tap it on lightly. Now, the gear height is one of the most important parts of the installation. It has to line up with this other large gear. Sometimes you'll have to readjust the height on the gear on the shaft depending on the gear inside the gearbox. When you put the plate on, see if there's any tension on the outer gear. If there is, that tells you that there is alignment with the motor gear. If it freely spins, it probably tells you you need to adjust the gear height on the motor shaft. This is something you'll have to play with. Once you have the gear lined up properly, now we can reinstall the gear mechanism onto the plate. You might have to loosen the center bracket screws. There's 3 with a Phillips screwdriver to allow the gearing housing to go back onto the plate. Once you have the gearing housing flat down through the pegs on the bottom plate, you will be ready to remount it with the 4 screws with a Phillips screwdriver. Don't forget to retighten the center bracket that you had loosened to get the motor gear assembly onto the bottom plate. Don't over tighten the screws as you do not want to strip the plastic threads. Now you can solder the wires back onto the motor. Make sure you have the polarity correct from the wires from the circuit board to the motor. If for some reason they're reversed, it will not damage the motor, but this unit will run in reverse and the skaters will run backwards. Tin your iron before you resolder the wires. Once the wires are soldered back onto the motor, we will be ready to finish up reinstalling the gear assembly Now we have the gear assembly. We have provided grease with the kit. Open the tube and add a little grease to the gear. Remember, less is more. You don't need a huge amount of grease, but just enough to add to the threads to lubricate the unit. Now, we have the gear assembly back on. Now, before you screw the gear assembly down, turn the motor on, and let's make sure that the unit is running in the correct direction. For this unit, it runs in a clockwise direction. We also know that the gear that we had put on the new motor from the kit is lining up with the gear inside the gear assembly. Now you can screw the center cone back onto the unit. Grab your top plate. Now we can put the plate back onto the unit. Now remember, we had marked the unit with a pencil where it originally lined up. Realign the two markings. Now, grab a Phillips screwdriver and with the screw and the little brackets, reinstall the plate back on the whole assembly. Do not over tighten these, as we do not want to crack the glass or strip the threads on the plastic standoffs. The process is to reinstall the top plate. Turn the unit over and reinstall the screws. Thank you for watching our informative video series at Happy Holidays Parts and Repair, where the love of Christmas is all year round. Thank you for joining us.